Welcome to the Top Texas Lawyers Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the law firm of Abercrombie & Sanchez, PLLC. You can find us on the internet at astxlegal.com or by calling 1-888-981-7509. Your hosts are Brian Abercrombie and Samuel Sanchez. Brian has been practicing law for 18 years and is board certified by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization in the area of family law. Sam has been practicing for 13 years, is licensed in both Texas and Florida, and is a certified mediator. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and all views are the opinion of the hosts. It is not designed to provide legal advice for your particular legal matter, and it should not replace the advice of competent counsel. Welcome, and we hope you enjoy the Top Texas Lawyers Podcast. Good afternoon, Sam. Welcome to the Top Texas Lawyers Podcast. How you doing?
Not too bad, brother. How you?
Good. I'm happy to be talking to you this week. We're going to cover millennials in divorces and aspects concerning millennials. Yeah, you know any millennials, Sam?
I know a couple.
Okay, so Sam, let me ask you a question. This is the Top Texas Lawyers Podcast, and with me, as always, is my partner in crime, Samuel Sanchez. Thanks for joining us. Let me ask you a quick question, here. Sam. Do you know what Cameo is?
So I'm vaguely familiar with Cameo, but tell me what it is.
Okay, Sam, this is awesome. Cameo is an app that you can go on there. And they have all kinds of different celebrities. Like, who's your favorite hero, your favorite sports hero, celebrity, whoever?
Right now, I'd probably be saying, I'm looking at Mahomes.
Okay, so if it's Pat Mahomes, you potentially can go on Cameo and say it's your birthday's coming up, and you want Pat Mahomes to give you a birthday greeting. You can go on, pay some amount of money, and Pat Mahomes will come and sing you happy birthday or wish you a happy birthday. So
I love it. All right.
But as all things with celebrities, you don't always get the top of the A list when you're talking about Cameo. So it filters down to old. I don't want to say washed up celebrities, but let's say backbenchers. Let's say celebrities that the star is kind of on the fading downward trend. So you'll get Mark McGrath from Sugar Ray, or you get, somebody from The Office or somebody from The Bachelor or something like that. So you get a lot of different, celebrities trying to make a buck out there, wishing you birthday greetings. Where that applies to us is that there's a trend that's kind of started where people are using Cameo to have the celebrity, say it's Mark McGrath, give you your breakup or your divorce. So you can have the celebrity call and give you the news that you're getting a divorce. How do you think that would go over?
I think if you want to guarantee yourself a swift kick in the teeth and a guaranteed trip to court, you probably want to try that. I mean, it sounds like a very interesting way to give somebody an FU send off, your favorite celebrity. It'd be hilarious. Like, as an example, I love Kate Beckinsale. My wife got Kate Beckinsale to come and be like, "Hey, we're getting divorced." I'd be like, "That sucks. You ruined it for me." I mean, maybe something like that, but that's a killer.
Yeah, I think it'd have to be done in kind of a lighthearted way, but breaking up is hard to do, Sam, and sometimes you might need that celebrity spokesperson to come and tell your wife that it's over.
Oh my gosh, that's hardcore. I did hear of that app.
If it were me, I'd have Robert Pattinson call my wife and let her know we're done.
This is ruin him forever for her, huh? I did see that
she
Lindsay
might just
Lohan,
say, "Well, are you available? Wait, he's gone, but you're available. Are you available?"
Right. So. I did see Lindsay Lohan had done something along those lines for somebody, and I guess it was like a coming out party. and she was just supposed to reply to the person, but she actually replied to all the individuals the person wanted her to. So, but I
Yeah,
can imagine there's all
they
kinds of
had
mistakes there.
they had Mark McGrath come on and break up with somebody on a long distance relationship. Um, but I think it was done in jest and that. But I mean, in all seriousness, though, they were talking about how that could potentially be a wave of the future to have some celebrity call up and break the news on a potential breakup or a divorce, which probably not the best way to go if you're trying to avoid a trip down to the courthouse.
Well, the new change is everything in this digital age is obviously, created new landscape. I mean, obviously now we have the ability to do service via email, which is something
Right.
that in the past we said it would never happen. So I could totally see, getting, that celebrity service for divorce or whatever it might be. You're getting sued because your kid beat up my kid or whatever it might be.
I see you got the gray hoodie memo. That's good. We're
I
a
did. I'm sporting
little
my. I'm
chillier out
rocking.
here.
I'm rocking my number 10 Red Raiders. I mean, we're living lucky right now,
Wow.
playing some serious
Yes,
ball. So, and it's a little
you
chilly
are.
up
You
here.
are.
We don't have that nice,
Okay.
that nice blanket of humidity that H Town has. So,
Yes, but when it gets cold, it gets cold. The humidity doesn't help you necessarily all that much. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about millennials. Millennials, just to give everybody like a frame of reference, is the Generation Y, and they're known by their birth years somewhere in the early 80s to the late 90s. So 81 through 96 or 97 is what they generally say the millennial generation is. And what's interesting about the millennial generation is, well, there's a lot of things that are interesting, but where it cross sections with family law, I think, is in the area of millennials are doing a lot more prenups, and prenups are not uncommon. In divorce cases, obviously you've seen them many times. I've seen them many times, but it's not what's in the prenup. It's what they're doing with these prenups and what's in them. Normally, back in our generation, I guess the old Gen X generation, or before us. I mean, the prenups had stuff like houses, cars, retirements, all of those kinds of things. I mean, a lot of the millennial prenups have that stuff in them, but they also have a lot of other things in there that we can kind of talk about. But yeah, for example, one thing I looked at this article about millennials and prenups, and they're doing them more and more because they're basically wanting to negotiate their exit strategy. It's a very millennial thing to negotiate your exit strategy before you ever get married, right?
I mean, as sad as a statement that is, it's actually not a bad thing to do. I mean, obviously the brilliance of prenuptial agreements is it really ends the fight of divorce. And if you have the ability to kind of, when you're in a good frame of mind and you still love each other, sit down and say, hey, should we ever want to part ways, let's just go ahead and set the ground rules, can really save you a lot of time, energy, and money at the tail end of that relationship.
So let's talk about a couple of things that these millennials are putting in these prenups. For example, because obviously a lot of millennials are waiting to get married, so they're getting married in late 20s. The marriage rates are down overall for millennials based on what I've read, but the ones that are getting married a little bit later than prior generations, and they're having kids later. But for example, they put stuff about social media in a prenup. So basically, if the relationship ends, there's a contractual agreement to not trash each other on the social media. So I'm not sure how that gets around the First Amendment, but and it's interesting. I guess you can contract away your First Amendment rights, right?
You can. I mean, it's actually a pretty good clause. As we've seen, social media seems to be the mechanism that everybody wants to use, the weapon of choice. So.
It's definitely the mechanism of the millennial, that's for sure. Anything on social media, they're very, very savvy where that's concerned. Pets. There was a couple of millennials that had an attorney draft a prenuptial agreement discussing pets, and they had visitation schedules and who's going to cover the vet bills and who's going to cover the training and the vet bills and all the other stuff that goes on with owning a dog or a cat. You can prenup. I guess you can contract around that if you want to. Another one is frozen embryos. So a lot of obviously infertility issues, and a lot of people are utilizing, fertility clinics, for in vitro or various other things. Um, so a lot of families will freeze eggs, or freeze embryos to, for later hopes of having children, right? So
Yeah.
they're contracting away who gets those embryos if there's an inevitable divorce, and what happens to that. So that creates a lot of interesting issues, because you're talking about, a potential child there, and what happens to the raising of that child after there's a divorce, depending on who gets the embryos and things like that.
Yeah, gestational agreements are really a fascinating area of the law that's really kind of up and coming, because that is a very hot trend among young couples, to really kind of look at that and forecast the future when they want to plan for families. Or, a lot of times now people are going into much later ages where before it was really unthought of to start families. I mean, we're not just talking about millennials. We're talking about, people in their 50s, that are saying, hey, I want to have a baby now, and I froze my eggs when I was in my 20s. Can I do that now? And I mean, these are all parts of definitely that can be encompassed in that partition or that prenuptial agreement.
So let's talk about this. You have a couple that gets divorced. They have some frozen embryo. Let's say wife gets the embryos. Um, she goes ahead, decides, well, there's no man on the horizon, so I want to have some children. So I gotta go ahead, and she uses these embryos and gets pregnant and has a kid. Um, what are we talking about in terms of this man who, unbeknownst to him, he gave his seed a long time ago before the divorce and while they were married. And then, this is not an uncommon thing. There have been cases on this. Then there's a child who has to support that child, who gets visitation. What's the story there?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times you're on the hook. I mean, you need to really be careful, because a lot of times you're going to get a child support bill all of a sudden that you're like, hey, wait a minute, I never agreed to that. But you don't have to. Your consent was implied or actually really tacit when you went into that gestational agreement about freezing embryos. So, you really need to be
It's
careful as you're
unfair, I
entering
think.
those.
Like, at the end of the day, I think it's unfair at the end of the day. I mean, 5 years after a divorce, you all of a sudden are hit with child support on a child that, is biologically yours. Um,
Well, and even beyond the financial implications of that, Brian, it's that, what if you decided I don't want to have children? I just don't. That's definitely a life choice that somebody's taking out of your hands if you haven't predetermined how that's going to be dealt with. So, those kinds of provisions are actually really smart and need to be really well thought out and carefully considered with competent counsel as you draft those.
exactly. So, that I thought was very, very fascinating, is that they're trying to decide whether those embryos are discarded, or whether whether somebody can utilize them, at the conclusion of a marriage. I thought that was a very interesting thing with these. So that's something that they are trying to think aloud on, I guess. Um, Another thing that a lot of student or a lot of millennials are trying to contract around is debt and future student debt, because they're saying that the average millennial comes out of school these days with about $52,000 in debt, just to before you get to go, before you roll
Yeah.
the dice and start going down to Mediterranean Avenue, or the electric company, or wherever you're going on the Monopoly board of life. You're 52,000 in the hole. So, um, a lot of millennials are contracting around not wanting to be obligated for student debt if your husband or wife pursues a degree while you're married, and incurs student loan debt. Um, so they are adding those to the millennial prenuptial agreements. I mean,
But I will
that's
tell you,
probably. Go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, I actually, that's something that's very relevant. I had a client here in Southlake, Texas, that what had ended up happening as we were crafting the prenup is the husband had an intention to go to medical school. So wife was already out in a career, and they anticipated that obviously she would be footing the bill for that medical school education. Well, as we all know, it's amazing how many young doctors fresh out of medical school all of a sudden file for divorce when they realize they're going to be
Yeah.
making, $400,000 or $500,000 a year, and they can trade up, potentially in wives or vice versa husbands, depending on who's attending. And so she wanted that written into the partition agreement or the prenuptial agreement, stating specifically that if she paid for this, any expense that came from her employment for his education was to be reimbursed in full. And that's a pretty smart provision. I mean, obviously, if they stayed married, it didn't really matter. But if they didn't, she got it all back. And that's a pretty sizable amount when you're talking about most doctors are spending, $150,000, $200,000 to go to medical school nowadays. So,
and then they don't make anything for their first couple of years of their residency, and they're living hand to mouth and working astronomical hours. So, as my first family law mentor used to tell me, there's always an empty hotel room and a willing doctor or nurse, right? um, so yes, there is a lot of that that goes on in the medical profession. I mean, obviously, the medical profession is one of long hours and long time away from family and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just something to be cognizant of. And yeah, if you're a doctor coming out of medical school with $200,000 of medical debt, if you're the ex-spouse of that doctor, you don't necessarily want to be saddled with that debt or even a portion of it. You're going to be upset enough as it is, I can imagine.
yeah, what a lot of people don't understand too is a lot of people say, well, isn't it true that the law anyway says that if it's your student loan debt and your education, it goes with you? And that's just not the case. I mean, you're talking about community debts, even though it's not community education. One person's going to walk away with that degree or certification. The other person is not, but both people could be walking away with debt. So you definitely want to think those things through. And it's smart to kind of pre-plan that at the inception of a relationship.
And you don't necessarily want to, I mean, whether you legally could be tied to the debt, depending on whose name's on it and what the debt holder's saying about the debt, and whether you signed on the line for it or not. That's one thing. It might be better with these prenuptial agreements to not even have to have that argument. If you don't even have to go down that road, that's sometimes better than ended up winning it at the courthouse. I mean, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And this is not an uncommon for prenuptial agreements, but a lot of millennials are contracting around various states' alimony provisions. That's something that's pretty standard. That's in a lot of, because most of these millennials, like I said, are getting married at a later dates where they have careers and things like that. So they're making creative provisions around alimony or payments or whatever. But I mean, obviously, some of that goes out the window depending on the laws of your particular state. At the time you have kids or somebody stops working or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I mean, you can play. The cool part about, prenuptial agreements is that you can really plan for a lot of contingencies. You can cover a lot of ground and a lot of the unexpected turns in life in a really well crafted prenuptial agreement. It does take obviously somebody with some, season, somebody who's done it, and you really have to have an idea of kind of where you're at in life, what you anticipate going in what direction. But those terms, you can really kind of throw a blanket over a whole lot of people's lives and make it fit. 95% of what's going on. There may still be some stuff that you're not going to obviously be able to anticipate, like you're saying, some disabilities or stuff like that may happen, something tragic. But for the most part, I mean, you can cover pretty much anything.
Yeah, and then another thing is obviously trying to create. There a lot of millennials are using these prenuptial agreements to create financial separation. From the onset of the marriage. So basically, what's yours is yours, and what's mine is mine. And we're not commingling our stuff. We're not creating marital property. We're not creating community property by our marriage. And I guess in a way that's smart. I guess if you have two parties that are on equal financial footing, that's probably a pretty smart thing. If you're not, it may not be so good for one person or the other.
No, and I always tell, especially couples that are coming in as they're contemplating this, I'll tell them, right now you may look at it, and if you're getting married later in life, you're in your late 20s, your early 30s, you've got a career, you've got, some investments, whatever it may be, and you're like, we just want to keep it separate. You really, again, let's talk about, that client that I said, one was going to become a doctor, the other was a vet tech. Okay, so this vet tech was paying the bills for this doctor to be able to go to medical school. This vet tech at some point is pretty well capped out. I'm not saying that vet techs aren't super important. I came from a ranching family, and trust me, vet techs are really important.
But there's a salary range there.
Yeah, absolutely. And doctors, this guy was wanting to go in and he was going to be a plastic specialist, a plastic surgeon who did like burn. He specialized in basically like burn therapy. And so high demand, high income, you know, his income potential was pretty much limitless depending on where he landed if everything went right for him. And so there was obviously going to be a disparity in the income of the party. So when you look at that and you say, well, what's yours is yours, is mine is mine, may sound great when somebody's just starting out, but you know, a few years down the road, you're probably kicking yourself in the tail for making that deal.
Yeah. And yeah, it's like I said, I think it's just an interesting area of the law that where kind of things are ever changing. Um, you know, love is love, but I guess business is business, right?
Well, you know, yeah, marriage is still a contract, right? Foundation of it's, you know, contract law. The only reason we came up with marriage was to kind of pass wealth and real property between generations, so, and families.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense. It makes sense. But I would really encourage people, as you're thinking this through, one, look, prenuptial agreements are complicated in and of themselves to lawyers, okay? But the complexity of them to clients is having the conversation, right? Sitting down with your significant other early in the game and saying, hey, this is something that I'm really going to want. Is it going to be a problem for you? Because I've had those situations to where, you know, we're talking about, you know, 4 weeks in front of the wedding and somebody's coming to me saying, hey, I want a prenuptial agreement. And the first thing I say is, does the other party know? Well, I haven't had that conversation with them, but I'm sure they'll agree. You know, maybe it's going to probably leave some hurt feelings. You know, you probably should have had this way back before you asked her to marry you. You know, these are the kinds of things that really you got to think through and kind of establish for yourself and the relationship early on would be my recommendation.
Yeah, that could be kryptonite for a relationship. If you're about to walk down the aisle and then you're laying a contract on somebody and telling them to sign here.
Not only that, but that could be grounds to set it aside. You know, I mean, like the formality of prenuptials is extreme and very well litigated and very much important. You know, everybody wants to say like, yeah, you can just kind of look at these things and the execution of them, the formalities of them are extremely important. And you really have to understand what you're doing and be well guided through those processes. Because if you make a mistake, then you can set it aside and it really didn't matter. It wasn't worth the paper that they printed it on.
And look, I understand the utility of a premarital agreements. I mean, you don't necessarily, you've been working for 5 or 10 years and you're about to get married and you don't want to lose half your, I mean, to be frank, you don't want to lose half your shit. I mean, that's basically what you're on the risk of, you know, or let's say you're already divorced and you don't want to lose half your shit again.
Right.
And maybe you want to leave something to your kids. And, you know, if you have kids from the first marriage. So prenuptial agreements are, you know, in today's age are, you know, with everybody having independent lives, independent retirements, independent, you know, things that they've built for themselves, you know, they become more important. So it's worth sitting down with a competent attorney to go over options before you get married, because like you said, it is a contractual arrangement as much as anything else. And look, if the two family dogs are very, very important to you and you want to keep them no matter what happens, come hell or high water, then by all means, put them in the agreement. I mean, dogs, you know how dogs and cats are treated under the law. They're treated as property. So you're better off contracting that stuff and making sure it's taken care of, so that you have some peace of mind and some security. And it's worth speaking to an attorney just as you plan for a marriage, just like anything else. Because, you know, like I said, people are coming into marriages with more stuff these days, and you know, it's worth at least exploring.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it can save you headaches, not only in that, Brian, about who gets it, but what it's worth. You know, that's what I really find using a prenuptial agreement can help with, is establishing the worth or the elimination of that particular worth in any type of consideration at the conclusion of that relationship. I give you an example. Had a guy who became a fashion designer for, you know, kind of sneakers, kicks, in New York, right? His big O kicks collection, you know, like 1991 Jordans and all these old shoes that I used to love and wear to hell, you know, tore them to pieces. They're worth thousands of dollars now. I'm like, damn, I wish I'd have never put them on my feet. But I mean, basically, this guy had a collection of shoes. Him and his wife are going to get divorced. And she's saying, hey, you know what, all your shoes are worth, you know, $30,000. And he's like, no way. And even if they are, I owned a lot of those shoes before we were married. Prove it. Show me the receipts. And so if you're going to
Right.
say, well, it was mine before, you have the burden of proving that in every state that I'm licensed in. And so, these are things that if you put in a prenuptial agreement, you've already kind of carved it out. You can say, hey, this is my watch collection, my Harley collection, my Corvette collection, my freaking diamond ring collection. And I had it before, and it's never going to be a consideration in relation to anything going forward.
Yeah, you're unlikely to be able to find that receipt from a Foot Locker back in 1998 to find a pair of Air Jordans, right?
Yeah, but she's got
gonna be
pictures
very
of them
difficult
all
to do.
lined up on your shelf in your closet, saying like, "Click, click, click. Let's internet price those bad boys." And you're like, "That's some bullshit, right?" It is, But
But yeah, I mean that's a perfect example. I mean, your old baseball card collection. I mean, that's stuff that's hard. You can't put it. I mean, you got Ken Griffey Jr.'s rookie card. I don't know if you have that. I have Ken Griffey Jr.'s rookie card, and I got that. I got that in a pack of baseball cards when I was a kid. How am I going to prove I got it in a pack of baseball cards when I was a kid? I mean, how are you going to do it? So, that's where a prenuptial agreement comes into play, and you can save your Spider-Man with the first appearance of the Punisher, and or whatever else is worth a crap ton of money, right?
Well, yeah, not only that, but like millennials. So like, right now what's hot, I guess about my son's like the tail end of a millennial. He was probably the last year of that generation. But he's huge into collecting books and vinyl. He's got this massive vinyl collection. Well, a lot of that vinyl we gave to him before. I mean, he's not married now, but I would hope at the point he sits down to say, hey, this vinyl collection that's probably worth a substantial amount of money now, it's mine. I brought it in. But to your point, he's not going to find receipts of any of that. And if his wife at that point wants to say, call bullshit on that, the proof is on him, and that's just a complicated process you don't want to have to get involved in. So really, as you think through.
Go ahead. Sorry.
The funny thing about. Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to,
Funny thing about vinyl is, remember when CDs came out? You're a Gen Xer like me. Remember when the CD came out? You could buy a record for about $1. Nowadays, you go in the record store, these vinyl records are $25.
Oh, easy, man. I've gotten him something like 50 bones, and I'm like, for a freaking album? What?
That was $1 whenever John Cougar Mellencamp, when he was Cougar Mellencamp, was $1 back in the day.
Oh, hell yeah. But now musicians are, that's a big deal. They'll come out with like limited edition presses of CDs that they converted and remastered on vinyl. And, we all know that the sound quality is different and all that. But I mean, it's just things like that. I would just encourage you. You don't really realize what you're potentially going to divide until you sit down and think about what you have and what you don't want to divide. And when you sit down and say, well, this is what I have and it's what I don't want to give up, it becomes pretty easy what you want to identify in your prenuptial.
Yeah, you're totally right about that. But like I said, I think there's gives me a little bit of hope for the younger generation that they are thinking through, some of these things and not just flying by the seat of their pants. I think, that's a good thing. I think anytime you can look at a situation and say, okay, we got to be pragmatic about this, and and account for some things like debt and assets, and there are some silly things. There's some silly millennial things in there like social media, but for the most part, I mean, they are thinking through stuff, which I guess is a good thing.
Hey, but I'm going to tell you on that social media front, really, like some of these accounts are worth banging bucks. Do you know what I'm saying? Like if somebody sat down and
influencers and whatnot,
they became an influencer and they're making, $60,000 to $100,000 from that account just by freaking posting pictures of themselves holding something. I mean, those are things that you're definitely going to want to kind of contemplate, because who knows who you turn out to be as you get older. And even if you're already married, I guess the other piece of advice I would give, young couples contemplating marriage, or if you've just recently married and you're like, damn, I missed that window. Well, I mean, I had mentioned kind of briefly a partition agreement. Well, prenuptial agreements, partition agreements, or, marital agreements sometimes are called in different states. But it's just your ability to kind of contract away that problem as things go forward. You can do it before you get married, but you can also do it after. Now, the formalities of doing it after are a little more complicated, but they're, not much. And it's definitely something that if you want to do, you can still do. And I would encourage you to at least have those conversations, but they need to be open and honest conversations early.
Yeah, that social media brings up an interesting point. So, like, I don't know if you've been paying attention to much of the news lately, but you got Marilyn Manson and Evan Rachel Wood tying up the airwaves. I mean, I know I'm not sure how big of a fan you are of old Marilyn Manson, but he's a weird dude. And whether you
He's got a
believe
couple of
the
tracks, he's got a
allegations,
couple of licks that I like, but yeah, he's definitely a little twisted.
whether you believe, Evan Rachel Wood or not, that's another question. But the fact of the matter is, she came out on social media and came with this story about what went on in their relationship. And it's caused, some other people have come out, and it's caused, I think, Manson's record label has dropped him, and different things. So when you're talking about that social media piece, I guess if you blow up and then somebody has something to say about you that isn't flattering, and which may or may not be true. I'm not saying that it's not true, but what I am saying is that you can get torpedoed on social media, and that be the end of your career potentially. I mean, that's happened to a number of people, and whether the allegations are true or not, um, you know,
Yeah, by the time the dust settles, the career is gone. For
right.
sure. I mean, he's already gotten
Fame's
dropped
a
by his
fleeting
label.
thing.
Yeah, I mean, he got dropped by his label, his current label. I mean, obviously he hasn't done a whole lot of stuff too much currently, but I mean, he's still a pretty well known name. And
I think
that's the thing about
big in the horror. I think he's big in the horror shows on AMC and all those different, or not AMC, but some of those networks up there on the cable channels. But not anymore. He's out of there too. So.
Yep. Yeah. No, I think, and when you're a persona non grata, it can obviously, like, if you turn it in a situation like that, people stop buying your music, and then all of a sudden the stream of income that's been pretty healthy for you is dried up. So those kinds of things are really, really going to be important. But along those social media outlets too that we were kind of talking about, I would tell you, like, one of the other things is photographs, right? So social media, I think, is kind of a big way that people share what's going on with your life, and pictures, photographs. Well, in this digital age, I will tell you that these accounts have thousands and thousands of images. Thousands and thousands of images. How many times have you and I had to subpoena people to get these records into court, right? We use them for a variety of different purposes, but as an individual, you think of, like, it's basically a record of my life. Some people have these accounts for decades. I mean, obviously, as far back as social media is coming up. And so when you think about all those photographs, the ownership of that particular account can really matter. Or do you want to be able to already have, predetermined terms that say, all the images that are on there of me, I get to keep. They belong to me.
Or you don't want people publishing your drunk bathroom selfie or whatever,
Exactly.
Publishing your your illicit photograph or whatever that you sent to him and meant for him only. That's obviously a big deal in the news today. And while a prenuptial agreement doesn't necessarily get you out of that situation, it provides another area of potential way you can get relief if something leaks or something's put out there to personally or professionally disparage you in the event of a divorce, that you might be able to circle back around and make a tort claim on.
Yeah, so, for sure. Helps a predetermined outcome. Absolutely.
So, well, I hear in the celebrity news, I hear that Dr. Dre may have had a couple of Dr. Dre ladies involved during the marriage. At least that's the latest allegation. Speaking of prenups, Dr. Dre has what he feels like is a pretty ironclad prenup. His wife would feel otherwise, but apparently now she's got some allegations of extramarital activity and various things out there like that. So that should be an interesting case that we're paying attention to, which deals with the prenup. Oh, and that's a prenup worth potentially billions of dollars.
Yeah, we're definitely going to be talking about that for the next couple of months for sure. It's definitely something that I think is going to predominate the news, and really the litigation of it's pretty fascinating behind the scenes. So we'll definitely keep people updated as we get to know more.
Well, Sam, how's everything else going? Good?
Good, brother. Good. I mean, I'm just looking forward to this year, 2021. Hopefully it's going to be way better. Obviously, we just opened our new office in Fort Worth, in North Fort Worth. So, we can help people in the Keller and kind of Heritage Trace, Saginaw, and Lake Worth areas there. We still have, our office there in Fort Worth. We're looking at expanding into different markets. So we'll maybe in the, Waco area for sure. Round Rock, we've opened a location in Round Rock, Texas, just north of Austin. So, things are looking up for 2021.
lots of things on the move, lots of exciting things coming down the pike. So if you want to get a hold of us, you can reach us at www.astxlegal.com. Our 800 number is 888-461-3964. My number is 281-374-4741. How do they get you, Sam?
Yep, you can hit me up at 817-914-5470.
All right. Well, thanks for the time today. We plan to hit some more topics. We won't always be hitting family law topics. We'll be hitting some other stuff as we go along this year. We plan to try to drop at least one podcast a week for our listeners that have been loyal. We really appreciate it. And drop us a line and tell us what you think. But we're planning to try to drop one at least once a week. So then we're going to provide different content. We're going to try to cover areas of law we find interesting, or stuff that's coming up. Stuff that's coming up in our lives, or stuff that's coming up in the world that we want to talk about. So thanks for the time, Sam, and I appreciate you, sir.
Yeah, take care, brother. See you soon.
All right.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the Top Texas Lawyers podcast. If you would like a consultation with either Brian or Sam, please call 1-888-981-7509 or visit us on the web at astxlegal.com. Once again, that's astxlegal.com. Thank you very much.